And I just want to make sure you can see my screen, right?
Yes.
My presentation. All right. Awesome.
All right. So thank you everybody for joining us today. My name is Ashley Aguilar. I'm the Senior Advisor for the STEM Center. For those of you that are joining now, before you leave, please be sure to click on the link for the survey that'll be available in the chat, and give us some feedback on how you liked this session. And now I am happy to introduce India Irvin-Choy, who is a fourth-year PhD candidate in biomedical engineering. And she is here to talk to us a little bit about her career path and her journey through STEM, through the STEM career path, and answer any questions that you guys may have after her presentation. So if you do have questions, please enter them in the chat and we will be able to communicate that to her. And without further ado, I will let India, go ahead.
All right. I just want to make sure I can see the chat open. Okay, great. All right, so I first want to thank you all for inviting me for speaking today for Engineers Week. The University of Delaware has a couple events going on as well, so I'm super excited to be talking with you today. And today I'm going to be walking you through how I got to where I am right now, but specifically on how I went from trailing to trailblazing. So just as a preface, I do have pretty interactive talks, so I will be asking questions throughout, and please feel free to ask me questions throughout as well. I don't mind having questions and I can see the chat as well, so that's fine with me. All right, so first I want to start with my favorite, which is a word association. So I play these games with my family and friends a lot, but the first word association on here is what words come to mind when you think of a scientist? So whatever words that come to mind, you can type in the chat and we'll kind of go through and like what comes up. Let me see if I have it on there. So words that remind you of a scientist or whatever words you think of whenever someone says scientist. You can go ahead and type them in the chat. So I can say a couple of words that I would think of, or at least before I became in this field. So if someone said, you know, that person's a scientist, I would probably think like nerd, or I would think maybe smart or diligent, or maybe even, it's another scientist word. Bill Nye, that's a good one. PhD, that's a good one. Bill Nye is one of my favorites. I'm in grade school, so he's my favorite. All right, so the next word association here is what words come to mind when you think of an athlete? So when someone says athlete, what immediately do you think of with that? Strong's a good one. So I would probably think diligent. I would think hardworking. I would probably think of team player, words along that line. Fit, that's also a really good word as well. So typically people tend to associate positive words with athlete and probably a different array of words, I'll say, when it comes to scientists. But the last word association here is trailblazer. So what words come to mind when you think of a trailblazer? This one's a little bit harder, not as easier for me. I would probably say diligent, hardworking again. I would maybe even say a trailblazer is dedication. That's a really good word as well. So typically when people think of trailblazers, they think of someone that's doing something for the first time and, you know, they're really strong, or but with other positive words that are probably similar to what you would describe as an athlete. But what's interesting about word association, and the reason why I ask these questions, is because I would describe myself as all three. So I grew up in very active. I have a ton of brothers, so I was always playing sports and I was outside playing with them. I was also a cheerleader. I was a field hockey player. I ran track. I played lacrosse. I was even in the high school band, in the marching band. So I was very involved. But I started playing field hockey in 8th grade and I really enjoyed it. And I eventually went on to play in college. So for me to play field hockey, I decided that I wasn't going to do cheerleading anymore. I was only going to play field hockey in high school. And then I continued on. So during the stages of my life, it was really important for me to not only major in engineering because that's what I wanted to do, but I also wanted to play field hockey in college at the same time. And at this time, which is around like 2014 was when I graduated, it was pretty unheard of and very difficult for someone to be both a collegiate athlete and an engineering major, to the point where most college coaches that were recruiting me actually tried to deter me away from doing both. But deep down, I knew that I wanted to keep field hockey in my life, and I also wanted to have a balance with engineering as well. So now you can see I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Delaware, and I'm currently majoring in biomedical engineering again. And I'll further explain, what I do now in terms of research. But first, let me take you back to how this all came about. So I'm from a small town in South Jersey called Pennsauken. My town is actually about 15 minutes away from Philadelphia. So we are near a major city. And naturally, I am an Eagles and 76ers fan. So I know this is in Texas there. So you guys got a couple of different teams against us. But anyway, and growing up in Pennsauken, New Jersey, I wasn't exposed to different job titles or positions in the corporate workspace. So my parents were both blue collar workers and still are. So they worked at the United States Postal Service. And at the time, no one in my family had gone to college. But I knew that I wanted to go to college because I wanted to see the world. I wanted to do something different. So as a high schooler, I wanted to go to the colleges that I saw on TV. So I wanted to, go to those colleges where you see the kids playing in the yard and then, hanging out with their friends and then, studying together. And that's what I really wanted. So I took it upon myself to become as involved as possible in extracurricular activities. I was involved in a ton of different sports, like I just told you, but I also did a bunch of different clubs. And an average day for me in high school started at 7 a.m. So when I got to school, and I would go through my classes, do everything I needed to do. And then at the end of the day, of the school day, so around 2 o'clock, then I would start all of my extracurricular activities. So most days I didn't really get home until 6 p.m., sometimes 9, depending on the day. But I knew that it would be worthwhile to be involved because one, it kept me out of trouble. I didn't really do anything. I didn't have time to do anything outside of all the activities that I was involved in. And two, I knew it was my way into college. So everyone that I had seen that had gone to college, like the upperclassmen, they were also all very involved in sports and in other organizations, and they did really well and went to school. So I wanted to follow in their footsteps because I knew my family didn't necessarily have the money to pay for me to go to school. So I was hoping to actually play field hockey in college on a scholarship. So I actually graduated 11th in my class out of almost, I think about 350 students. I don't remember the exact number, but I was in the top 20 of the students in my graduating class. And one of the things that we got to do as the top 20 was to give a quote in our yearbook. So my quote was actually, "Life is not about the number of breaths we take, but by the moments that take our breath away." And that's by Maya Angelou. And I remember when I submitted my quote for the yearbook, I thought, like, I can't wait for all the experiences that are coming for me in college. But while I was in high school, so I was taking the AB classes, I was in the honors courses, I was super involved in sports. And I also knew, though, that I was good at math and science. However, I didn't really know what types of positions were available for scientists and engineers. Actually, at the time, I was very interested in entrepreneurship. And the reason why is because I used to watch a ton of reality TV. And one of my favorite shows at the time was actually Basketball Wives. And on that show, I saw a lot of women that were starting their own businesses. So they either had like their own clothing line or their own shoe brand, or they were opening up, like different boutiques and restaurants. And I really saw myself in those women. I like related to what they were going through, and I really thought that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. And at the time, I had a keen interest in makeup. So I mean, I still do now, but not as much. But I would watch, all the YouTubers, do their makeup and hair and everything, and I thought, like, I would love to have my own makeup brand. So I remember telling my parents that, I want to be an entrepreneur. I want to have my own makeup line. Like that's what I'm going to do. But again, in 2013, 2014, it wasn't as easy really to start your own business. So it was kind of unclear of how I would get there. But one of the things that actually caught my attention was my chemistry teacher. I loved chemistry at the time, and the chemistry class that I took was amazing, and so was my teacher. But she told me, I think you should be a chemical engineer. And again, at the time, I had no interest. I was like, no, I don't wear my own makeup. I don't really care. Like, thanks, but no thanks. But it wasn't until later when I was talking to my dad where he actually told me that chemical engineers are the people that formulate makeup. So they, look at all the different ingredients and they find the right combinations of ingredients to give you your makeup products, whether that be mascara, lipstick, eyeshadow, so be it. So once he told me that, I was completely like sold on engineering. I was like, all right, well, I'm gonna be a chemical engineer. My teacher already told me that I'm good at it, so I might as well try it out. So I ended up going to Rowan University, where I actually entered as an undecided major. So during my recruitment stage, so again, I was being recruited for field hockey. I was talking to a lot of different coaches, and again, they didn't really want me to major in engineering while also playing field hockey. And Rowan University was one of the very few places that would allow me to do both. And they had a great engineering program as well as a great field hockey and athletics department. So I actually applied to Rowan for the chemical engineering program, but I didn't get in. And the reason why was because I was 100 points short of the required SAT score. So at this point that I applied, I already taken the SATs twice. And I knew that I was not good at standardized testing. So I didn't even want to push my luck in taking it a third time because, after the third time, they then start to average it. So because I was being recruited to play field hockey, I spoken to the coach and she actually resubmitted my application for undecided. So for my freshman year, I was an undecided major, but I was still taking the same courses as all of the engineering majors because everything was all gen eds at the time. So I had to wait a full year to actually reapply into the chemical engineering program because the program's requirements made you wait so you can get full years of transcripts or of grades. So I couldn't just like switch in like every other major could. I had to wait. So I played field hockey. I went to my classes and I did really well. But what ended up happening was after my full first year, so at the end of my freshman year, I reapplied and to the chemical engineering program. And for a second time, I was rejected. So again, because I was an athlete, my coach then reached out to the dean of the engineering college and asked, what could I do to get into the program? Because at this stage, I had had the grades, I'd had the classes, I was on track to be an engineer, but for whatever reason, I wasn't accepted in the program. So the dean of the college actually said, well, we have a full roster for chemical engineering, but we are starting this biomedical engineering department. And we're looking to expand the first class of students. So, if she's interested, she can join the biomedical engineering program. So at this point, I had no idea what biomedical engineering was. I did a couple Google searches and I saw that biomedical engineers make prosthetics. And I was like, well, I guess I could do that. And then that's not true. I later learned what else biomedical engineers do and on top of prosthetics. But because it had engineering in the title, I decided to just take a chance on it and I decided to join the major. So like I said, most programs you're introduced to your gen eds in the first year, but it wasn't until the years that you started to take like the bulk of your engineering courses. So when I joined the program, I started taking classes with students who had already been engineering majors for a full year. And because of that, they were very familiar with each other. I didn't know anyone. And because of field hockey, I actually didn't have much time to spend, in the engineering clubs and all the organizations that were available on campus. So overall, it was really hard for me to meet people and build connections. But luckily, I did end up clicking with a group of ladies that are in this picture on the bottom right. And together we formed our own study group and helped each other out, both in class and outside of class. But what was really special about this group of women was that we all had responsibilities and major responsibilities outside of being engineering majors. So I was a field hockey major, I was a field hockey player, and Julia here was a lacrosse player. Or I guess you can't see where I'm pointing. Julia in the bottom right was a lacrosse player. Caroline in the pink, she was a soccer player. And then Alyssa, Cindy, and Michelle all had full-time jobs on top of being engineering majors. So we all kind of understood each other through our different responsibilities. And because of that, we're able to work together really well, actually, and help each other throughout the program. To the point where by the end of our 4 years, we had wine nights at my house many times. But it wasn't actually until my junior year that I started to do orthopedic research or just do research in general for the Orthopedic Research Center. So my advisor, his name was Hamid. He was actually a retired orthopedic surgeon who decided to start his own lab because he wanted to work with engineering students. So he was actually teaching at our sister medical school at Rowan, and he wanted to start his own lab, and we had the space for it. And we also had the students as well. So I was one of his first students in the lab, and I was one of 3 girls that worked there. But of our group, we had electrical engineers, we had mechanical engineers, we had biomedical engineers, and medical students that were all from our sister school. And because of all of our differing backgrounds, it was really difficult for me to understand everyone. So what everyone was talking to me about, what they were asking me for. And as a student lead, it was really difficult for me to lead the group together. So I either couldn't understand the medical terms that the medical students were saying. I didn't know how to use SolidWorks, which was our design program that the mechanical engineers were really familiar with. And I ultimately ended up having to learn everything on my own just because my curriculum was so far behind the other students. At this point, I also didn't know how to even read journal articles. So just learning about the field and orthopedics in general was really difficult for me. There were many nights where I Googled almost every single word in a journal article. But overall, I really struggled to get started in the lab. It took me an entire semester to be able to effectively communicate with my advisor, and even a couple more months to learn how to use our software program. But in this lab, what we were working on was actually called orthometamaterials. And the idea was that if we could design materials with different porous structures, like shown here in the red, then those pores would provide different mechanical properties that would be useful for either hip prosthetics or knee prosthetics. So what we would do is we would design these porous designs on SolidWorks, and then we would put them in the different mechanical testing machines. So this one was a compressor on this far right. And we would 3D print all of our designs and then break them. So we would record, how much mechanical strength was required to break all of our designs and compare them to each other. We also did torque tests as well. So the image in the middle is actually us trying to figure out how the machine worked. So that was when we were configuring it together. But from this research, I was able to present at a variety of different conferences. So you see my poster in the middle. We actually won the poster presentation that day, or the competition. So I was really proud of that. And the lab eventually became my home. So even after working for, I think it was a year and a half, it ended up being the lab wanted to celebrate my birthday. So we had birthday celebrations, and we had New Year celebrations and parties and things. And overall, I really enjoyed my experience in my work and the freedom that I had in being a student in this lab. So I decided I wanted to go to graduate school from there because even though I really liked orthopedic research, I knew I wanted to get involved in drug delivery. And unfortunately, Rowan didn't have any drug delivery labs at the time. They do now, but they didn't when I was there. So because of that, I decided to go to graduate school. So I ended up sending in my applications to graduate school. And at the end of my senior year, I guess in the middle of it, so about December of 2017. And then I went to a research conference. So as one of the main students in the lab, I really functioned as a graduate student. So I had different opportunities in traveling to different conferences, as well as relaxing, as you can see on the hammock, and giving presentations in different locations. But one of the conferences that ended up changing my STEM trajectory was the CMBE conference, or the Cellular and Molecular Bioengineering Conference. And it was there that I was actually offered my graduate position that I work now. And it's actually kind of funny how it came about. So I wasn't even planning to go to the conference. I was actually planning to go on vacation, but I ended up going last minute. And when I got to the conference, I did what I normally did. I did what I normally do, which is interact and meet people. So I was very friendly. And I talked to people about their research, and I presented my research as well. But I went to a lunch one day. It was actually a mentoring lunch for students and different faculty members. And I was paired up to who is now my department chair. But we ate lunch together. And, during that lunch, I just asked her a bunch of questions about graduate school. So I asked, what do advisors look for in a graduate student? What questions should I ask when I'm visiting graduate schools? And overall, what the graduate school process was like, because at the time I was still very unfamiliar with it. So during this lunch, she actually stopped me midway and asked me, did you apply to University of Delaware? And I actually told her, I didn't know University of Delaware had a biomedical engineering department. So no, I didn't apply. But I can submit my application. When is the application season closed? And she said, well, we've already closed the applications, but I can make an adjustment for you. And you can send it to your application as soon as you get back from this conference. And I said, yeah, well, I'm actually interested in drug delivery. Like, I'm presenting on, orthopedics today, but like, I don't really want to do this for graduate school. I want to do something in drug delivery. And she said, oh, great. There's actually a drug delivery advisor that's in the conference now. Like, do you want to go to dinner with her? So I thought, this is insane. Like, you're inviting me to dinner with someone I don't know. But I ended up saying yes. So later that evening, we went to, it was actually a conference-wide dinner where I met a few other graduate students from all over the country, actually, and they actually gave me great advice for what to look for in a graduate school. But at the end of the dinner, I went up to the woman I met earlier in the day, and she introduced me to who is now my graduate school advisor. So it's really interesting how that all came about. But I always like to say that it's always the least expected moments that'll really change your life. So after that, I decided to go to the University of Delaware. So I visited University of Delaware and two other schools for graduate school, and I decided on UD. So after undergrad, I moved to Delaware and I started the following semester, so in the fall of 2018. And overall, my transition to graduate school was actually really difficult for me. And one of the reasons why is because I had absolutely no experience in wet lab science at all. So I didn't know how to do simple things like cell culture. I didn't know how to pipette or like different techniques for it. I was also lost, like physically lost on campus all the time. I had no idea where I was going. Even with Google Maps, I was always confused and trying to find people that looked familiar that were in my classes. And the third thing that really held me back was that no one actually looked like me. No one had similar backgrounds to me or I could even relate to in my classes. So everyone in my cohort had known that they wanted to go to graduate school since their freshman year. I hadn't decided until right before the start of my senior year. Everyone had research experience that from their prior years, whereas my research experience was mostly a year and a half. So I was like pretty sure in their research experience as well. And they were also familiar with advisors and how graduate school worked and what the process was like. I was still getting my feet wet. I was learning on the go. So I didn't really know what it was like to be a graduate student. And even though I was interested in drug delivery and trying to soak up as much information as I could, I felt really alone all the time. And not to mention, this was my first time I didn't have roommates too. So there wasn't really anyone for me to talk to at the end of the day about, what was going on in my work life. So I ended up retreating a lot back to my college town. So I'm only about 45 minutes away. And I ended up visiting my family and friends on the weekends, every weekend. I didn't really spend too much time or leisure time in Delaware because I didn't really like my research life at the time or my graduate school life at the time. But one of the things that kept my attention during the week, so when I was in Delaware, was my research. And I spent most of my early years pretty much playing catch up in the field, and even more time trying to learn different experiments and techniques in the lab. However, I was really lucky that I was able to present my research as a second year. graduate student, which is pretty rare from what people have told me. So a lot of graduate students don't have either the data or the opportunities to travel until about their third or fourth year, whereas I was in my second year and I was presenting a poster, as you can see. So this conference was actually the Biomedical Engineering Society national conference I presented at. And this work was on us looking at the analysis of nanoparticle delivery to the placenta and embryo in pregnant mice following intravenous administration. So this study was really about us delivering either gold nanoparticles or gold nanoshells to pregnant mice. And what we would do is at different gestations, we would sacrifice the mice and look at where the particles travel to after 24 hours of the injection. So what we found from the study was that particles pretty much ended up in the placenta, but they didn't actually reach the embryo. So this was really interesting work. And it was my first time not only presenting my work, but also doing, the analyses and presentations and all the hard skills that come along with being a scientist. But it was an exciting result because it could then be used for fundamental knowledge and understanding how we can use nanoparticles in the future for different pregnancy-related complications in maternal and fetal health. So even though I really liked my research and I thought it was interesting, and I still do think it's interesting, I was still missing that social life and connection that I really wanted. So like I said, I was going to my college, to my hometown all the time to see my friends from school. But during the pandemic, I couldn't do that anymore. So what I started actually during the shutdown was my social media page, which is called Be a Meat Queen. And oh my gosh, I didn't know it's playing. So if you haven't met or haven't seen my social media yet, it has become my online community and safe space. So I started this space originally to meet other Black scientists or just people in the field that had similar backgrounds to me. And eventually this became my online community. I started sharing tips for other graduate students or prospective students to learn how to get into graduate school, so how to put together your application, how to find the right mentors, how to find an advisor, how to find, the right lab fit. So I ended up putting all that information on my blog, which is still active and available right now. And then one of my lab mates actually convinced me to start making videos on TikTok. So she's like, "You are so animated. You should make videos. You would be great for it." So I started to do TikTok as well, and showcasing all of my graduate tips on there as well. And recently I have transitioned to sharing facts about sustainability, which is something I'm really interested in, as well as different lifestyle changes and tips that I've been making in my own life throughout this journey. One of my newest features is what I'm reading, which surprisingly a lot of people really like. I wasn't expecting people to like that feature, but because of the pandemic, I started to read more. And because of that, I've also started to share what I'm reading on social media. So people seem to be really interested in the different literature that I'm reading. But I think one of the favorite posts, or one of the most known posts on my page, would probably be my failure resume. And that was where I listed all the things that I quote unquote failed at. And the reason why I made this post was a way to expose my failures, but also highlight my strength instead of the usual Instagram highlight reel, right? So everyone knows that Instagram is a bunch of highlights, but I wanted to show all the things that people hadn't seen and everything that happened in the background. So it included me, being rejected from the chemical engineering program twice, and including me not being accepted into any REU programs that I applied for. It was the resume is pretty long, if I say so myself. But again, it was really an opportunity for people to see that even though, there are a ton of accomplishments and a lot of great things that I have done, I have twice as many, if probably not quadruple the amount of failures that I've endured along the way. So as I continue social media and through, graduate school, I'm sure my content will change, as I like to change it up very often. But in general, it's always what's going on in my life and how it may or may not resemble other people's graduate school journeys. But one of the things that social media has afforded me is that it's many opportunities, including this talk. But one of my favorites is probably unrelated to graduate school. So last year, I hosted the very first engineering gala, which is our first annual event. And This is an event that we hosted in collaboration with other science and engineering communicators on social media, as well as influencers, brands, and corporations. And together we threw this engineering gala, which was an event to raise money for scholarships for Black students or Black engineering students. And we're actually in the midst of our application season right now. So the applications for these scholarships close on February 28th. So if you're interested, I'll have the information on my closing page. But during this event, we collaborated with a bunch of different people. And throughout the event, we raffled off different goodies and baskets, which a lot of people really enjoyed and were donated from our sponsors. We had a 3-course meal, as you can see the guys in the middle there that were enjoying it. We had dancing, we had birthday cake because it was my birthday. And overall was a really great event. I mean, I couldn't ask for anything more, but one of the major lessons that I learned just from this experience is that you can really do anything you set your mind to. And using the engineering gala as an example, I came up with the idea in June, and the engineering gala took place in December. So in just in a matter of 6 months, we were able to, myself and Camille, who's in the bottom right here, we were able to not only put together the event and get everyone a sponsor, people to donate to it, but to also do a really good thing that aligned with our values as well. So it's something that I would have never guessed that I would have done, especially during graduate school, but I'm so thankful that I was able to do it. And actually all throughout my STEM journey, I was the underdog. I'm still am to this day. So no one expected me to throw an engineering gala this past December, but I did that. No one expected me to make it past the first semester in engineering as an engineering major, but I did that. No one thought I would get into graduate school, especially with having such little research experience, but I did that as well. And now I'm sure there are quite a few people that aren't expecting me to actually graduate from graduate school, but I'm working on that now as we speak. But every time I found a way to not only prove them wrong, but to also do it in a way that is authentic to me, which is pretty much a nice way of me saying that I give them a little spice and a little attitude on the side. So if there's one thing that you take away from this conversation is to go after what you want. If you don't see anyone that looks like you or is doing what you want to do, go be the first. It's definitely going to be hard, and there are for sure going to be days when it's going to suck and you'll wish that you made a different decision. But overall, it's going to be worthwhile, and you will definitely be proud of yourself afterwards. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for your time and attention, and I would be more than happy to answer any questions. I can pause this. I will also check the chat too for any questions as well. What did your typical day in grad school look like? Great question. So every day varies. Um, I can give you an example from today and yesterday. It's 2 completely different days. So today I had a morning meeting, and then I came into lab, and now I have this meeting, and then I have 2 more meetings later on today. So there are days where I'm in meetings all day long. But yesterday was more of a typical day where I will come to the lab in the morning and set up my experiments. Depending on what experiment I'm working on, it can take a couple days. So I typically will start it in the morning and then check up on it throughout the day in the following days. In the afternoons, I always have a lunch. I will never skip lunch. But in the afternoons, I tend to do a lot of the, I call it housekeeping, but that's, checking my emails, recording stuff in my lab notebook, updating any protocols I need to do. I'll typically schedule meetings for the afternoons as well. So I tend to have my afternoons pretty light, but my mornings are normally the day-to-day science experiments. Where did it go? I keep losing the chat. Okay.
So India, in addition to the chat, we had a couple of questions that were sent in.
Okay.
So one of them was being that it's Black History Month, and a lot of the conversation that we're having right now is just around underrepresentation and racism. We had a question from one of our followers of have you had to deal with any kind of racism or microaggressions with coming into this field?
Yeah. So yes, unfortunately. And actually a lot of them have occurred since 2020, I'll say. Um, so I do get a lot of, I would say, negative feedback and microaggressions online, just in social media. But in terms of, being at conferences or just being in the professional space, a lot of times they are subtle and that some people won't necessarily realize. So I'll give you an example. During a conference talk, I was asked a question that wouldn't actually be like was out of the scope of my research, I'll say. And when I gave that answer, the response that I got from the person who originally asked the question was, "Oh, you must not know what you're talking about." So there are things like that that happen. And it is definitely unfortunate. But what I have found that has been helpful for me, at least, is one of the good things that's happened since 2020 is that a lot of people started different organizations for different racial groups. So I have attended a lot of different either seminars or groups or organizations that are catered towards Black women in STEM and in engineering. So those have been really helpful in terms of finding community and just connecting with other people that may have experienced similar things. And it also has actually started to change a little bit in terms of how the field works, and that a lot of the women that are in these groups are then speaking at other seminars about diversity, racial inclusion, and things of that nature. So the attention is going in the right direction, but unfortunately, I have experienced those things as well in just my graduate student space. And from what I've heard from other people, it doesn't necessarily stop there. So yeah.
So, if you don't mind me asking, in that situation, how did you respond to that?
So actually I didn't respond. So another person from the audience responded, and they were an advisor as well. So I think the person that asked me a question was an advisor, and then another advisor who was a woman chimed in and said that was an inappropriate response. So in that case, it's definitely helpful to have allies in the room, and speaking up with you, because I think if I would have responded, one, I wouldn't have had anything nice to say, but also just me being a graduate student and being at a lower, I guess, authority rank, it wouldn't have gone over well in that scenario. So yeah, I don't really know what I would have done if someone else didn't say anything. But I think once the ally spoke up, it became pretty apparent how that person reacted to my answer.
Wow, I love hearing stories like that where there's people that speak up, because I know in some situations it's just kind of like, did that just happen?
Yeah,
Uh,
where you're
you know?
like stunned for a bit. Like, did they just really say that, or did I like
Mhm.
make that up? Like, is this really going on?
Yeah,
So yeah, when they responded, I was like, oh, okay, everyone else heard that person whisper like under their breath. I'm like, okay.
yeah, yeah, right. Another question that I have is, what are your tips for managing time in grad school, or even with like the hobbies that you have in addition to that?
Yeah, I am a huge advocate for a calendar. My life runs off of calendars, Gmail invites, like that's the only way things get done. One of the newer things I've implemented, so just with content creation in general, I've become more busy, outside of graduate school. So it's really trying to find a balance between the two. So what I've started to do, at least in 2022, is every day I will make a to-do list in the morning. And if I get everything done on the to-do list, I stop there and I don't add anything else. And, I'll wait for the next day to finish what I have to do, or, make a new to-do list. But if I don't get everything down the to-do list, I will still stop there because, I can't do everything in one day. So it's definitely helped with making me feel like I'm being more productive in terms of just getting things done. It's nice to me to check off things on the to-do list. But it also helps me stop myself from working, all hours of the day. So even if, do I make a bunch of aliquots in the lab and, I attempt an experiment and it doesn't work, I'm not going to try it again that day. I'll come back the next day and that's when I'll try again. So that's definitely been helpful in terms of managing my time. I also just, like I said, I use a calendar day in and day out, even for my family thinks a little bit extreme, but even for like family events, I will pull out my calendar and look at it and block off, extra time, like buffer time in the middle for driving, travel, everything, just to make sure that I don't double book myself or, I don't tell someone else that I can go to something and not be able to go last minute. At this point, I think I need a secretary, but that's one of the things that I have been doing is really keeping on track of my calendar, my planner, because if it's not written down, it's not getting done.
Got it. Good. Yeah, that's exactly how I have to manage my time, both at work and at school. So another question that we had was the work-life balance between grad school or while you're in grad school. I know a lot of concerns that some of our students have, because a lot of our students have, other family obligations and stuff, is the amount of time that you have to dedicate to doing a research project. And if it's possible, or if you found it helpful to really draw that line.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely difficult. I always tell people that the work-life balance changes. So like even when you think you figured it out, life throws you a curveball and you have to like refigure it out again. So as an example, so in the earlier years of graduate school, you're taking classes, you're also conducting research, and as well as getting adjusted to graduate school and your new environment. So in that case, I didn't do a lot of research. I mean, even though I did like present research later on and get results and stuff, the bulk of my time was dedicated towards classwork and getting class stuff done. So once I completed my classes for my PhD, I then started to do the time that I was spending on classes became my research time. But then I started to do more outreach work, so including social media, different demos with like high schoolers, middle schoolers, things like that. So I'm constantly readjusting my time and how I prioritize my time. I also have had to reprioritize my social time as well, because social media started out something that's fun and that was like my hobby, and now it's almost become my job. So now anything that's fun is things that don't get recorded, that don't get posted. It's my private family moments. It's me playing with the dog on a weekend or something like that. So I've had to readjust how I spend my time both on social media and off social media as well. So I think a lot of people don't really think of social media as a job. They may think of it as like social, but that has kind of flipped for me recently, where I've had to delegate a specific amount of time for mindlessly scrolling on social media and then stopping. So it definitely changes throughout. I think in graduate school in general, a lot of people do struggle with the work-life balance. And from the people that I know personally that don't necessarily have a great balance, don't make progress in either parts of their life, right? So they're either not making progress in the lab and, also not really maintaining the relations that they would want to, outside of the lab. So I always enforce, or I guess try to encourage people to, when you're looking for a lab, just ask the other graduate students how they are able to do it. And if it's something that is normalized in that lab. So an example of that, my lab members, we like to hang out on the weekends sometimes. So we'll plan like bowling nights or like wine nights. And we're actually doing a lab ski trip tomorrow. So clearly we, do a lot of fun things. But because I'm in an environment where other people also want to have fun and also want to do things outside of lab, it's easy for me to do that. But everyone's lab may not be like that. So it may be a little bit more difficult if you're in an environment where everyone is working 24/7 and you're the only one that's not. So that's also, the environment also does play a huge role in how you maintain your work-life balance throughout graduate school.
Those are such great answers and helpful
Thank you.
information. For anybody that may be thinking of going into the field. Does anybody else have any questions for India at this time?
I don't think I can see though. Oh.
I don't have any additional questions in the chat.
Okay.
So with that being said, or with no other questions, we will go ahead and conclude our webinar. The recording of this webinar will be available on our YouTube channel. So India, if you want to go back and replay it just to see or share it with anyone else. If you guys do have any questions for India, please feel free to follow her on Instagram, TikTok, and her other social media avenues. You can also send questions in to me at my email address, which is on our STEM Center page, and also follow us at pac.stemcenter on Instagram. And I will be happy to relay the messages to India and get you guys connected if you need or if you want to speak with her a little bit more on her journey. I want to thank you again, India, for everything that you've accomplished and sharing that with us and taking the time to speak on that. And I hope everybody enjoys the rest of their day.
Thank you again for having me.
Yes, of course.